Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Joe Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's podcast. In today's podcast, we are focusing in on another one of the ICF core coaching competencies. And today we're focusing in on cultivates trust and safety, which is at the heart of all coaching conversations. But today we're going to dive into the detail of some of the indicators that the ICF give for cultivating trust and safety.
Yeah, and I think before we just sort of dive into the ins and outs, I think it's probably worth saying that no coaching can really take place if the trust and safety isn't there. Because trust and safety, I think, is the foundation to great coaching. So when your client is able to express freely without fear of judgment and to trust in their coach as their sort of facilitator and partner in that coaching journey, that's where the magic can take place. If a coachee feels that they need to withhold, that's going to be really hard because you'll only have limited information to work with. So, really spending time and investing in cultivating that trust and safety is a fundamental piece to great coaching.
And, there's an active word there, cultivate. So trust and safety doesn't exist without you and the coachee taking actions to nurture it. So that means not just initially in the chemistry conversation, it's an active thing that we do in an ongoing basis throughout all of the coaching sessions and program, and also when you come to the end of that program. So being clear around the boundaries within coaching and the conversation. Confidentiality, obviously, is fundamental to all of this.
I think it also is worth looking at your own relationship with trust. So if you are somebody who trusts immediately and trusts until you are shown otherwise, then you might bring that frame of reference into your coaching and almost take for granted the trust. Or if you are somebody who doesn't trust very easily and is a bit suspicious, you may find yourself actually withholding in your coaching with your client and thinking, oh, can I trust my client to perhaps talk favorably about this experience? So you may come into it worrying what the client is going to say about you as opposed to being focused. So I think there is a piece beyond this competency. And I think the EMCC bring this out really well when they talk about self-development and your own kind of self-awareness and understanding and continuous development as a coach. And that is something that is worth investing in and paying attention to, because the more you can work on your own relationship to trust, obviously the more that is going to show up and cultivate in the coaching sessions with your client.
And perhaps thinking about what you acknowledge in your very first conversation together with your client around trust and safety, and how you're going exploring how you can develop that together, the importance of it for the relationship. If you've got a client who has experienced betrayals at work or in their personal relationships, you're likely to see some of the impact of that in the process of developing the relationship with them. So there's so much more, like with every title of the core competencies, there's so much more that we could say, debate, and talk about related to it. But we're going to keep focused on the ICF indicators. And we're looking at the PCC, which is the second level. They have ACC, which is the first level of accreditation. PCC is the second level of accreditation. And then they have MCC. So we always like to stretch our learners, no matter what stage they're at. We have very high parameters, if you like, that we set for our learners. So we're going to explore these with you. So the very first one here is coach acknowledges and respects the client's unique talents, insights, and work in the coaching process.
Yeah, and we had a little chat about this offline, didn't we, before getting started? Because in each of these indicators, there's actually quite a lot of depth. So I think a starting point will be to look at the acknowledging and respecting piece. And I'll explain this again by some of the things that we don't do in coaching. So, what we wouldn't do is tell our client what we think they are. So, you wouldn't start by saying, gosh, you are so talented at creative thinking, or, I can see you are a person that is X, Y, and Z, if the client hadn't introduced that concept themselves. So when it comes to this one, which is acknowledging and respecting, let's take the client's unique talents, for example. If the client is talking about a situation at work or a project they've been a part of, and they may say, I'm really proud of the way I handled the uncertainty. You can now recognize, respect, and acknowledge uncertainty, whereas you wouldn't lead with, oh, you strike me as a person who would find uncertainty like easy. So when we're looking to recognize our clients, we're recognizing our clients through the lens that they have shared with us already. It's about acknowledging and respecting what they bring and drawing out observation from what the client says. So if the client shares something around, gosh, I'm just really struggling with the amount of moving parts that this project has. And in a previous session, what you've heard and witnessed in the client is actually in another context, they have this ability to juggle multiple tasks. And you may draw on stuff that they've previously shared. That's really interesting because in the previous session where you shared with me that project, it sounded like actually you had some skills around juggling lots of moving parts. Tell me what's different this time. So we're constantly using information that the client brings to help the client to recognize their own unique strengths, to shine a light on those unique strengths when they show up in coaching, and to acknowledge and respect that all the clients that we work with are different and unique in their ways. What would you build on, Jo?
I think beliefs are really important here. So if we were to acknowledge something that we saw in the client and it didn't fit with their belief system, it can have that impact of it's hitting Teflon. It doesn't penetrate. The client doesn't receive it basically, and they reject it, and that can then set off almost reinforce that they don't have that, when you as the coach may have offered it as a way to empower the client. Having said that, there are situations where we can offer a complete counter to what the way they may have been describing themselves. That's in the way that you described, so where the client has previously shared with you examples of that, but they're not in touch with that in the present conversation. So there are, of course, nuances, depth, and different circumstances with it. But I think it's really important to think about, can my client receive it? Because we're always working in the space of what's useful for our client, what's useful and helpful. And so the client acknowledges and respects the work in the coaching process, so the work that the client is doing. So the client might say, you might ask them, what's been useful in today's session, or how are you experiencing the coaching so far? And let's say the client says, it's really interesting. I'm definitely changing. I'm learning a lot, feeling a bit overwhelmed actually, and it's much harder than I thought it would be. If you don't acknowledge that at all, then the client may not feel witnessed, or, if you think that there's a reason that the client behind everything that the client shares, they may not know the reason that they're sharing it, but it may be useful. So the coach can acknowledge that and say, I hear, and that may be enough with some clients, because it's not only what you say, it's the way that you say it. You might, with a particular client, say, I hear that this is hard for you, and I respect the effort that you're putting in to achieve your goals. You could say something like that, so that you're acknowledging it, and you're respecting it as well. And we know that coaching is challenging. It's not an easy space to be in, and sometimes it's important that we normalize that for the client too, so that, because a client might be worried that they're finding it hard, and they shouldn't be finding it hard in their model of the world. So acknowledging that and supporting them around the experience that they're having can be important too, and that plays into some of the other indicators here.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover, isn't there? And I was just going to touch on that piece around acknowledging and respecting the client's insights, because there's something there, which is sometimes you will see something in what the client is saying that the client doesn't see. And you mentioned there, it may be about readiness, or it may just be something that isn't relevant to the client. And we will share observations in coaching and say, oh, I heard you say this and I heard you say that. And I'm sensing there is, I don't know, some nervousness about the situation or whatever it might be. And so the client might just be, no, no, I don't think so. And we need to let that go and respect and acknowledge that whatever the client sees and notices from their own insights. So there's that piece around detachment and respecting what the client sees and brings that creates a trust between the two of you, because you aren't there to judge what the client does or doesn't become aware of in the session. You're simply there to acknowledge it, to witness it, and to be a part of that journey with the client.
Yeah, I think acknowledging the insights. So if the client has shared something new, or you're also observing the body language, and you see something in their body language that you think is an indicator that there's a new window, a new opening, for the client's view of the world. You can, if the client shares something new, you can make a decision around asking, you know, is there a new insight emerging for you here? And the client, as Zoe said, might say yes, or they might say no. And whatever is true for them, but sometimes it can help to underline. So the client might say, I'm just wondering if I do this because of X. And you might stay silent as the coach, and then the coachee might say, I've never really thought about that before. And again, you might choose to stay silent as a coach, or you might choose to ask a question around the insights, that the new insight that they might be having around that. So that would be an example of an opportunity for you to acknowledge and respect the insight that they're gaining.
Yeah, it's not always about saying something, is it? Sometimes it's about letting come. I think there is also a piece which is most people want to feel attuned in some way to another person. There's this piece about connection. I think that brings trust. And so when you as the coach are there and you're either saying or you're creating the experience of I see you, I hear you, what else is there that you want to share? Like there is an inherent trust that can come from that place of relationship and connection.
Hmm.
So the next one is about showing support, empathy, or concern for your client. And this again is an interesting one because it isn't the same kind of concern, support, and empathy that you might have for a friend, So you aren't there consoling your client like you might do a friend, like, oh gosh, that sounds awful, or I can't believe that happened, or I'm so sorry that you've had that experience. It's not that kind of empathy, support, and concern. It's more around, again, the witnessing, as we've talked about. So if you have a client who is sharing something tragic that may have happened in their life in the context of what they're trying to achieve, or they get emotional when they're making contact with an obstacle that they're trying to overcome as they want to achieve their goal, that isn't the time to be like, oh, I'm so sorry, are you okay? That's the time to sit back, perhaps in silence, and let the experience happen, and then inquire with the client, like, how are you? What's happening for you right now? You're showing concern and support by witnessing what's happening and demonstrating that you're there for the client.
I think when we're talking about these things in the context of cultivating trust and safety, it's about I think our clients can feel if we trust them, like we implicitly trust them. We as coaches enter into the relationship with our clients, and you'll hear a phrase, sometimes, which is, the client has all of the answers. We trust that the client has the answers, or they can find the answers, with the support that they can find around it. And it's an amazing feeling to be in a relationship with someone that you sense implicitly trusts you. And whilst there may be parts of you that reject that, can't understand it initially, I think there is a co-regulation that can happen with regular contact in that kind of a space, where you can start to even just entertain the possibility that you can trust yourself more, or start to trust yourself again. So that showing support, empathy, or concern for the client isn't about us going into panic as coaches if the client starts crying in a session. There's an outpouring of, like, maybe a release of emotion, perhaps that's been client may not have even realized has been stored for some time, or for any number of reasons, not panicking and going, are you okay? It's not that. It is being able to, give space to the client to express their emotions, the authenticity of their experience. And it's about using our tone of voice. It's about using our body language, maybe staying still, and the tone of voice being very compassionate and understanding and calm, and just even referring to, saying things like, we've got a number of sessions that we can explore this through. That is an expression of support that we can offer our clients. It doesn't have to be, it definitely isn't, in fact, rescuing.
Yeah.
Like, so saying like, I'm here for you, to me is a little bit more towards the rescuing side, than explaining we've got a number of sessions to be able to explore a topic through.
I think there is also a piece about not just the emotional kind of when
Mm.
things go wrong type, not when things go wrong, emotions aren't wrong, but you know what I mean, when they're more difficult, and showing concern for the client around how are you getting on? Like in this coaching experience, your interest in the client's journey. And I think that is about how do we do that well and to cultivate trust and safety? Because I think people want people to take an interest in what they're doing.
Hmm. And we've had people come to supervision before that have said they have a client and the client cries in most of the sessions. So, coach showing support, empathy, or concern for the client in that context can be the coach saying, or sharing an observation. I've noticed that in our sessions, a lot of tears come for you. And I wanted to check in with you around how that is for you. And the client might say, "Oh, no, I cry at whenever anything comes on TV. I cry at the drop of a hat." Um, for me, crying is like a normal part. It shows that I'm finding it really valuable. That might be the client's experience. You asking the question in a non-judgmental way, it's just reflecting an observation, is a form of expression. You're showing support and concern in the context of, I'm concerned about your experience of the coaching. If you feel that with a client that you're not sure if coaching is the right support for them right now, that can be an expression of showing support or showing concern for the client. So checking in around that, how are you finding our sessions? Is it providing you with the support that you need? Are you making the progress that you want to towards your goals? If the client says no, then there's an opportunity to have a conversation. It's absolutely fine if coaching is not the right thing. They might not have known until they started coaching. But having started, it doesn't mean that you're a bad coach. It might just mean that through what they've learned about coaching, they've realized they need to have a different type of conversation or a different type of support. So that's another reason why showing support, empathy, or concern for the client can be critical. It relates back to the very first competency, which is demonstrating ethical practice.
Yeah. So the next one is another big one, and that is the coach acknowledges and supports the client's expression of feelings, perceptions, concerns, beliefs, or suggestions. And I think this is where there's crossover in what we've already talked about, is again coming back to that acknowledging and support, being able to do that in a non-judgmental way. So if you're not wanting to draw your client's attention to something that they've said, maybe it's highlighting a potentially limiting belief that you can see is showing up and getting in the way of them being able to achieve their outcomes. The client has permission to reject that. And that's okay. And we need to be able to step back and walk away from that. Now, if you see that come up again and again in a session, you may gently choose to reintroduce it by saying, I know I've shared this before, and wasn't something that you could see for yourself. I'm just noticing the same thing coming up again, and I'm just curious as to what's happening here for you. Yes, you can reintroduce things, but if the client is still like, oh no, I don't think that's relevant, we still walk away from it. And that is about respect, and respect generates trust.
I'd also like to add here that, when I read this sentence, there's so many words in it. And I can remember going through the process of like accreditation, coach acknowledges and supports the client's expression of feelings, perceptions, concerns, beliefs, or suggestions, and thinking, right, I need to find a feeling, I need to acknowledge the feeling. Have I acknowledged a perception? What is a perception? Do I even know what that is? I need to acknowledge a concern and a belief, a suggestion. Oh, they have, I don't think they mentioned a concern. Does that mean that I won't make it, maybe not in that extreme, but I think that's a natural process that anybody new to the competency framework or the accreditation process might experience. And I would just like to reassure you that you don't need to do all of those things. So you need to know how you might approach phrases that you might use, for example, to acknowledge those things. But it's more about the general environment that you create for your client. So as Zoe was talking about, it's about making sure that the client knows that they can speak freely, unfiltered within the coaching conversation. And you can acknowledge things in a very simple way. So, for example, if the client said, I'm just so angry about this, as the coach, you could say, I hear that you feel really angry about this. Yeah. And that can be enough. You don't have to explore everything about the anger in order to have ticked the box around acknowledging or supporting it. It may also be as simple as saying, thank you for sharing how you feel about this in this space. What else would you like to share about that? Or what other feelings are present for you or that you'd like to talk about here? And you can, with perceptions, that's a tricky one because clients don't tend to say, I'm perceiving this as. So this is more around how the coach is perceiving what is shared in the coaching conversation. So it's about, we might use phrases as coaches like their model of the world. So I think there's a real overlap between perceptions and beliefs. So they might say, my experience of this is, and they may not have that level of awareness that it's their perception and there are other perceptions of it. So how would we acknowledge a perception? We might say something like, I hear that your experience of this is da 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 da.
Yeah, it's ultimately about respecting the client's reality. You
Mm.
know, we code those as beliefs and perceptions and things, but it's their life and it's very real. So if they're sat there and they're saying like, my line manager believes that I am unproductive, like it may not be true. We don't know that. We can't verify that because we don't have the line manager in the room, but we work with our clients' reality. And if they believe that that is real, perception or not, that is the state that they're working from. So something's only a problem if it's a problem. And I think the other things that you were saying there, Joe, is like we don't coach everything. So where you were saying, like, if a client then follows up with, and that just makes me so angry. But if the goal is, I don't know, something completely unrelated to the line manager, we may not go and explore that because it's not necessarily relevant to what they're trying to achieve. And that's
Mm.
where we come back to other competencies around, that's where your client gets to choose. That just because they've shared something doesn't mean that that's necessarily what they want to work on.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on something in the phrasing of this. So coach acknowledges and supports the client's expression of feelings, etc. The supporting it doesn't mean that you say, oh, I hear that you, for example, in that example, I hear you're angry and I understand why you're angry. That isn't the expression of it because as you said, Zoe, we don't know, everything that's going on for our clients. It's really that acknowledges and support is supporting them to be able to articulate their feelings, their perceptions, their concerns, their beliefs or suggestions. And I think that's a really critical piece of understanding for
Mm.
that particular one. And then the final one here is that the coach partners with the client by inviting the client to respond in any way to the coach's contributions and accepts the client's response. So that could be that together you're talking about what you're going to do next in the session. And you might feel there's a natural flow into something and you're talking about where you're going to go with it. And the client says, actually, I don't want to do those things. I think what will be really helpful is if we, and they bring something brand new and you don't connect to it at all. You can't understand how that is relevant. You respect that this is their time. They know themselves better than we know them. And if they feel that that's going to be useful, you can, of course, challenge it. So, to check out the useful, make sure that they're not distracting themselves from what is going to be most valuable. But once you've explored that, that you go with them so that they know that it is their time and they drive the session. We are there in a supporting role. We're not the main character.
Well, and that's really important for responsibility, which we've talked about on another podcast, where you, as the coach, do not want to feel responsible for your clients' outcomes. You just can't coach multiple clients if you're feeling like you're responsible for the work that your client does. So your client has to be able to own their journey and for you to be able to take a step back from that. So if the client says, no, I don't think it's that, or I hear what you're saying, but I just don't see it, great, because they're owning their journey. If what you find is every time you share an observation, your client's like, yeah, 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 just check out, like, are they pleasing you? Like, do they have a share of their own voice? And I think that's important for cultivating trust and safety is to create moments where actually you're leaning in, not always through observation, but you're asking your client, like, what are you noticing here? And giving your client a chance to express themselves and their truth, whether you think that that is what you're seeing or not.
And so this is about contracting. It's about ensuring that the two of you are exploring how are you going to work best together? And so that that tension, if you like, or the disagreement or misalignment is helpful. It's important that it is a dynamic space that you can adjust together. That the coachee is going to arrive with different energies, with different things on their mind, with different emotions to different sessions, and that we talk about the coach and the client. We are equal individuals. So we need to be really mindful as the coach around the power distribution in the relationship. And that power is influenced by a number of different factors. And we have a responsibility to be mindful of it, to discuss it, so that the coachee can get the very most that they can, the most value out of the sessions that they possibly can. So if the client says to you at a certain point, I'm not sure that you're the right coach for me, what work are you doing on yourself in order for you to be able to receive that in a way that you can accept it easily and respect the client? And in many instances, that is a sign of progress for the client, that they have been able to articulate that they have been able to create and hold boundaries for themselves. They have new insights around what is useful for them. And so the priority then is around how you discuss with the client, how are we going to end this well? What support are you going to go on to have? So that would be an example of an extreme version of that at that end of it. And I guess the very early signs of that are that the client also feels able to respond and say, I don't know, if they don't know, rather than giving an answer because that feels like the expectation of what they're supposed to do in a session, but actually they find themselves articulating somebody else's story and it's not their truth. So for me, this particular one is about a client being able to honor their truth, their values in the
Mm.
coaching session.
It's about flexibility as a coach, isn't it? I was reflecting there what you were saying, Joe, and I had a client once, and my style of coaching is quite exploratory and emotions based and quite deep. And this client in about session 3, just as we were starting, and I checked in on how things are going, just shared like that's not really the work that she wanted to do. She wanted to keep it more transactional, I guess. And we talked about whether that was with me or with somebody else. And she's like, no, that was fine. And so we continued in a different way. And so it may have been my style to coach in a particular way, but it wasn't meeting my client's needs. And given that this was a relationship we both were happy to continue, it was about my adaptability. We can't expect our clients to adapt to always fit our style. So those things will come up if you coach enough clients.
So we hope that today's discussion has, stimulated you to kind of reflect back on your relationship with trust and safety, to think about the things that you do actively, right through from the chemistry conversation all the way through the coaching relationship. And if the conversation has got, you're not a coach yet, but this conversation has got you even more kind of thinking around, oh, this is really the area I want to be working in, and you're interested in training to be a coach with us at In Good Company, then you can take our quiz, mycoachingcourse.com, and that will point you in the direction of the right level for you to start at with your coaching training.